Hey there, everybody. I am joined by Ben from West Michigan Transformers once again. Say hello, Ben.
Hello, Ben. Hi, Matt.
And we are here to talk about the Two Towers block of Lord of the Rings TCG and the Shadows meta portion of it. So we did the Two Towers Fellowship piece, which is sort of the good guys, and now we're going to talk about the bad guys.
Hmm.
So, Ben, bad guys, what should we
Yeah,
do?
bad guys. Well, uh, because I love shooting off in different directions. We talked at the beginning of last video about our X list and the relation to the meta. I just wanted to really quickly point out. Imagine if Saruman, Keeper of Isengard from Series 3 was still like tournament legal. He's the one who makes all your Uruk-hai fierce, and he prevents wounds to Uruk-hai, so he protects them from archery, maneuver phase wounding, even from, should it happen, lost skirmishes. In Two Towers, he would have become extra abusive because there is specific site support for Saruman to make him an automatic minion. So there's a card called Deeping Wall, Series 5, Site 5, and it just says straight up, play Stormon from your draw deck. So takes all the guesswork out of it. Um, and I have that over here if you want to look at it a second.
Sure.
Otherwise, so yeah, the Deeping Wall, play Stormon from your draw deck. Bad news. And it's a battleground, which the Isengard characters really love to use. And then you also have the Orthanc Balcony. So having played Saruman at Site 5, you can also then play Saruman from your discard pile and for a Twilight cost of -2. So that's rough. He had to go. I just wanted to say that. And even if even though Saruman Keeper of Isengard is gone, these sites are not banned. So like totally an option. Something you can go for. That should lead us into our first bit of discussion. So in Fellowship Block, Isengard ruled the shadow meta, at least tournament wise. You can make competitive things other ways, Sauron, Moria, Ring Wraiths, etc. But like Isengard was the most popular, very powerful, certainly. And then in the Two Towers, the story, like the books, the movies, they focus in on Sauron's grab for power, his war with Rohan. So the Uruk-hai in the story become the main antagonists. And so fittingly, Isengard remains the dominant shadow side of the Towers meta. I think in our list of the top 16 decks from Worlds 2003, I believe 8 of these run strong like Isengard support, either like an Isengard main deck or like there's a lot of Isengard inside of it. So Isengard is still like the big thing. Um, in Towers block, Isengard kind of splits off 5 different directions. So first of all, you have the wargs, the warg riders, and these are specifically Isengard orcs, but their thing is to, with their wargs, prevent skirmish special abilities from happening, and then they just have tons of vitality, and they make you fight them twice, and then there's a lot of like discard pile recursion, or at least enough, yeah. So they're kind of unwieldy, but like they're really big. That's their thing. And then you have just Isengard orcs kind of plain out and proper. Their deal is wounding you during the regroup phase. There was some of that already in Realms of the Elf Lords, and you can definitely combine now those two strategies. So in Realms of the Elf Lords, those Isengard orcs exert during their group phase to wound, and then in Towers block, the Isengard orcs discard themselves and other Isengard orcs to wound. So then you can double up. You could play. Um, I'm forgetting what their names are. You could play one of the Realms of the Elf Lord ones, exert him twice. An Isengard Retainer, that's an example. Exert him twice, wound 2 companions, use the Isengard Plotter to then discard him, put on a 3rd wound, and then the Isengard Plotter can even discard himself. So, like, lots of wound stacking going on. The next thing is the Evil Men. These are the traitors and infiltrators of Theoden's court. This is not a dominant strategy. I don't even know if you can make a full like 30 card shadow side out of like the evil men. So you have to support it if that's true, like with other minions or other Isengard cards, but they're out there. Like they're a thing. And their ringleader is Grima. Grima, of course, splashes really well just into Isengard strategies. He is the bane of like really big multicultural fellowships or like superhero companions who stock up with a bunch of cards. He sneaks around and sends things back into your hand, so you got to watch out for him. Okay, really strong in the meta. And this is what the winning deck list in 2003 was based around, were the Isengard trackers. So these guys generally sacrifice that characteristic damage bonus that the Isengard Uruk-hai have in exchange for the ability to be fierce, but they gain the fact that usually in their fierce skirmishes they come back even stronger. Um, the problem with like fighting fierce minions is if your companions won their skirmishes the first time but they didn't kill the Uruk-hai, they may not have the skirmish events left to contend with them the second time, especially since a lot of these guys again come back stronger. Like this one, just during a fierce skirmish involving this minion, it is strength +2. So like you have to watch out. You can't take anything for granted. And the fierce Uruk-hai become really dangerous for Frodo because if any of your companions did die during the first round of skirmishes, now there's a second round of fights, the fierce skirmishes. There are fewer companions, and Frodo might have to step up to the plate. So the fierce skirmishes become like really dangerous. And then the other strong thing about these guys is because they're fierce, they're quite resistant naturally to like Shire stealth event shenanigans, because you might cancel the first skirmish, but do you have yet a second stealth event in your hand to cancel the second one? Maybe you do, but what if I have 3 trackers out there and they're all fierce? Like, your hand's not going to keep up. The hobbits can't hide forever. So the fierce thing on these guys turns out to be really helpful. And that goes hand in hand with the fact that Isengard has a lot of skirmish support, even tapping into like first block, but certainly in second block too. So you can go back to a lot of stuff and just make them really, really scary. And then some of these trackers even gain a damage bonus back on their fierce skirmish. At least one of them does. So a single minion could end up doing like 3 damage to you. Very rude. And then 5th in Isengard, you basically have your storming Helm's Deep warrior sturdy damage +1 kind of Uruk-hai. These are the natural result of what we saw in first block. This is like that that history being, I can't think of the word. I can't think of words today. That's okay. But you get what I'm saying. The line is continuing. So like look at this brute. While at a battleground, this minion is fierce and it's already 14 in damage +1. It's very easy to put battlegrounds into your adventure path in 2 towers. And then if you go into like the controlling sites kind of mechanic, which is available in towers, then this becomes even stronger. It can prevent wounds. Yeah. So, I mean, this is just one example. There are tons of Helm's Deep Uruk-hai who are like damage +1 and like really buff. And I would say there are subgroups within that subgroup, because that's the story of the Siege of Helm's Deep specifically. So you have Uruk archers, a lot of those guys. Some of them have damage bonuses, some of them don't. You have Uruk berserkers, who generally key off of, they become stronger as they and the companions they're fighting get more wounds on them. And then you have just guys like this, the Uruk rearguard, the Uruk regular, people controlling sites, people going out and using their damage bonuses and their incredible strength just to like put huge dents in everything. So I had mentioned that the trackers were super important. Let's look at Michael Dalton's deck again. This was the winning deck at Worlds 2003. And at least like three minions are, like, I'm going to bring them up. So we have Ugluk. He's a tracker. He's got that characteristic fierce we've been talking about. The roaming penalty for each Isengard tracker you play is -2. Like, okay, so Sauron trackers in first block had a thing where they would make roaming penalties -1. So there's a little benefit, but you had to kind of stack two of them before you were done. Ugluk just ends it. You play him, and your minions are roaming, but they don't pay for it anymore. And then while you can spot two trackers, him being one of them, Ugluk is strength +3. While you can spot three trackers, Ugluk is damage +1. So highly Twilight efficient for 4 Twilight cost. And then a couple other trackers out on the board. You have this fierce strength 12, damage +1, vitality 3 tracker. So Ugluk is real bad news. We have 4 copies of Uruk Chaser. This is just basic, powerful skirmishing, because during a fierce skirmish involving this minion, it is strength +2, so it gets into, strength 11 at the end there. Here we have 3 copies of Uruk Runner, so like a lot of power going on. Here we have Mahir, remove 2 to prevent an Isengard tracker from taking wounds. At the very least, Mahir is, again, really Twilight efficient, because he's 9 strength and fierce for just 3 Twilight, which puts him on pace with the Uruk Captain and the Uruk Warrior from first block, who are good just for their stats. Mahir is a lot like that. Okay, and I had mentioned in the last video that skirmish events were having trouble in the Towers meta. The big reason for that, and 6 decks include this in their list, 6 of these Worlds 2003 decks. Here is the bane of Fellowship skirmish events. So the Palantir of Orthanc, or the Palantir. Okay, to play spot an Isengard minion, so you have to have like that cultural reinforcement. But again, there's like 8 of these decks running Isengard. It's at the top of the meta. Shadow, spot an Isengard minion and remove 1 to reveal a card at random from the Free People's player's hand. Place that card on top of that player's draw deck. This card feels harmless. It's a little deceptive because, like, I've already played my Fellowship characters and possessions and conditions. I did most of my work during the Fellowship phase, and all the cards you're making me put on top of my deck, including potentially like shadow cards out of my hand, I'm just going to draw them again when I reconcile. Like, maybe you're threatening that I won't be able to discard a card at the end of the shadow phase. I mean, at the end of the turn, if you put all my cards on top of my deck. Like, what's the real problem? Well, the problem is there's a few cards the Free People's player hasn't played yet, and that's their events. Maneuver events, archery, and then skirmish events, especially, even like regroup events. So if you are relying on playing, like with your Ringbound Rangers, War and Valor, to make a Ranger strength +3 and damage +1 against a roaming minion, the Palantir, there's a good chance during the shadow phase, way before that skirmish ever happens, that is going to remove that event from your hand and put it on top of the deck. That's the main application I see for this, and I'd love for people who like this card to chip in and comment like what other uses they've enjoyed it for. I think that's the main thing. And in this Towers meta with 6 of these decks running the Palantir, it was a huge benefit to build your Fellowship up in such a way that it didn't rely on skirmish events. That's hard for me. I love skirmish events. That's like one of the ways mainly that I build my decks. I'm glad that eventually, when it came time for Return of the King block in January 2004, the Palantir finally got put on the X list. So in King block, this isn't in the meta anymore, just because Decipher realized it was too much. Anyways, this had a huge meta warping effect, and definitely rewarded players for being Isengard. And then, hey, look, Saruman. This isn't even our big scary Saruman, but here's a guy who can discard a condition and play his staff from his discard pile. Sauron's staff allows Sauron to cancel the part of his text that says he can't fight and he can't like participate in archery fire. So he becomes like a fierce damage +1 Uruk-hai, essentially. Yeah. One last thought. Uruk Spear. Well, this was certainly meta relevant. Exert bearer to discard a free people's mount. So if Rohan was at the top of the meta, then it's good to have like a silver bullet. You can get rid of free people's mounts running Isengard cards and then Uruk Spear. And then this causes me all kinds of trouble because I love elves and archery, and bearer may not take wounds except during skirmish phases. Isengard has a ton of support. Isengard is very powerful, definitely a force in the meta. So there's Isengard. I think I have talked through them pretty thoroughly. So let's go ahead and look at some of the other stuff. Really quickly, I'm not even like going to go through the cards, but you'll notice, like if we look at this deck list by, oh, it's Casey. Hello, Casey. And to anyone watching this, you know, if your deck list is on here, I'm not trying to ignore. These decks are just like easily accessible. They're near the top of the list. Like here's the first one.
So this is like a Moria, goblin deck here, right?
Right. So there were very, very few cards added in Towers block for Moria. It's just that the machine that was set up in first block is still so efficient and so fun and powerful that it was worth including. Like it was worth going for. So still just a force in the meta. You can absolutely run Moria in Towers block and it's totally fine. Okay, then we got a new thing. I'm gonna pull up like if I can. Where'd I put it? Pardon me.
So as you kind of think, I'm just going to talk here briefly. So I guess we've covered Isengard, we've covered a little bit of Moria, which I mean it makes sense thematically. There wasn't much, and then we have Harad. Harid. I never knew.
Yeah.
These are the Easterlings. I'm sorry. These are the Easterlings. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, there's two ways to think about it. Let me go back. There's these guys too. I'll start here. So there's Saldrons and there are Easterlings. Yes, the men of Haradrim. I don't know how you would say just the country. Harad. I guess I would say Harad, but the culture is called Raider. Yeah. So Raider culture in Towers is first introduced like in Towers block. So you don't have first block even to go back and refer to really in the first place. But you're split between the Saldrons and the Easterlings. The Saldrons focus mostly on Twilight manipulation with a mechanic called ambush. So when an ambush minion is assigned, then they immediately add that ambush value to the Twilight pool. So the Saldron Invader gets assigned to a skirmish, he adds one to the Twilight pool, so it's out there for him to use. And then they use generally pretty expensive costs keying off of that Twilight that you've added. So like this is a very standard skirmish event for the Raider culture. It gives them +3 or +5 if you spot 6 companions. Notice that as opposed to the typical like 0 cost or 1 cost, this is a 2 cost event, but it has a base of +3 instead of +2, and then you can get up to +5 for a relatively easy to spot effect. And then like Whirling Strike, this costs 3, but it does a very sudden wound during the skirmish phase, so it has the element of surprise. Here is a very similar effect built into like this companion's ability. New Fear, exert a man to add a burden for each companion over 4. This is during the regroup phase. Like, how are you supposed to spot 4 Twilight during the regroup phase? Well, with Saldrons, you're adding Twilight as you go. So, like, that's their big thing. Then the other part of this is the Easterling sort of subgroup. Easterlings are all about burdens, not necessarily for the sake of corruption. They're happy if Frodo's like half corrupted. Like if they can get 5 burdens on Frodo, they are cooking with peanut oil, because for them burdens are like an alternate resource to fuel their skirmish phase war machine. So you have a few cards in here like the Easterling Lieutenant. Each time this minion is assigned to an unbound companion, you may exert him to add a burden. Same thing with the Easterling Guard. You're generally including like 4 copies each of these to get the burdens going. And then if your opponent decides they want to assign to like Frodo, or if you should be running up against Ringbound Rangers, you have an alternate card when they're fighting against Ringbound companions to add burdens. So you kind of get the engine going, and then you're just working off of those burdens. While you can spot 3, this minion is fierce and damage +1. Easterling Axeman only needs 2 to become strength +3 and fierce. And look, here's a Saldron. We just saw him in the other slide too, but he very much splashes with the Easterlings. While you can spot 4 burdens, this minion is strength +5. Okay, so here's a guy for 6 Twilight. If you have enough burdens, he's 18. While you can spot 5, he's fierce. While you can spot 6, he's damage +1. Notice this guy over here, using burdens and then removing Twilight to give skirmish bonuses. And then this is subtle, but I think one of the most powerful cards in the Easterling arsenal. While you can spot 2 burdens, Bearer cannot take wounds. And that's not just during the skirmish phase. That's cannot. So you can lose skirmishes to Ents with huge damage bonuses or dwarves and just be like, I don't care. Let me fight again. I'm fierce. And then while you can spot 5 burdens, Bearer is damage +1. Stack this on this guy or on this guy, and you're running around with like damage +2. And notice, okay, so this was the Saldron, as mentioned. And here's a guy who's removing Twilight. I think Decipher was trying to set up cross subgroup support for the Saldrons and the Easterlings to work together, for Saldrons to like add Twilight, and then Easterlings to like work off of that Twilight and the burdens. Like there's some kind of mix in there together. Here's a Saldron who loves the burdens to support the Easterlings. Here's an Easterling who loves the Twilight from the Saldrons to spot them. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard, though, to put the two of them together. I think it would take a lot of hard decisions about what to not include in the deck from the two like subgroups together. There's probably a deck out there. I'm just saying, I think Decipher was thinking about it. I don't know if they went all the way there or if like I'm totally missing something. Usually you see Easterlings together with a Desert Legion, and then Saldrons together, and they're like their own thing. Okay. Then clicking through these a moment.
So I think we have, let's see. Oh, these are my favorite. The Dundlings. Dundlings?
The Dunlanders, yeah.
Dunlanders, like the wild men. This is probably my favorite.
Yeah. So they have a few things going on. I would say their main idea is they want to overwhelm companions by sheer strength stacked on single minions. So not like Moria where you're swarming, but it's kind of like a strength swarm. So look at this guy. His one thing is just that for 4 Twilight and ceasing to roam already on site 3, which is dangerous. That's really dangerous. All he does is he's strength 11, but like who is strength 11 for 4 Twilight? I guess eventually some store on orcs are, but the gigantic trade-off there is that they stop roaming at site 6. And then like here's a classic possession iron axe, strength +3. Put that on this guy, and he's already threatening Faramir and Boromir, like with overwhelming. Dark Fury. Here's again that terror at site 3. Make a minion strength +4 if at a sanctuary. So nasty surprise. Death to the Strawheads. Make a Dunland man strength +1 for each companion you spot. So if you have the Twilight out there, you could be adding +5, +6, I don't know, +7, something really, really rude. So these guys are very, very strong and very, in that way, Twilight efficient. Like they get a lot of power for early being done with roaming and not much Twilight cost. That was a jumbled sentence, but you know what I'm saying. There are a few like sub strategies going on within Dunland. They also like discarding possessions, which is very annoying. You don't get a lot of that out of the shadow side, but Dunland is very good at it. So this minion will discard possessions for winning, War Club gives you a strength bonus and then discards possessions for winning. So this is to target those Elven bows or Aragorn's bow. Get rid of those during the archery phase. Because the obvious and glaring weakness for Dunlanders is they have low vitality. So they need lots of shielding. Fortunately, sites 2 and 3 in Tower's Block have Dunland favoring sites which skip the archery phase, or rather, I think they say that Dunlanding minions can't take wounds during the archery phase, so that gives them early like shelter. And then again at site 3, you're just already set up for like a bomb shadow phase. And then there are conditions like hides. Actually, this is a possession. So what am I saying? That makes it harder to remove. There's less possession removal, again, out there on the free people side too, than there is condition removal. So if a man is about to take a wound, remove 2 or discard this possession to prevent that wound. So this can protect them. I think there's also Scratch a Living Off Rock, if I'm remembering, or Living Off Rock, something like that from Series 6. You play it, spot some Dunlanders, add 2 tokens to it, and then you can remove tokens or discard the condition to prevent wounds. Another mechanic that they enjoy is becoming fierce if they win skirmishes. So look at this guy. Each time he wins, he becomes fierce. This one, very much like in Isengard Tracker, if he wins a skirmish, he'll become strength +2 and fierce. But he is only 3 as opposed to like the Uric Hunter who was 4 for 9 and +2. And then kind of a third angle on Dunland is site control, which is again a mechanic that comes into 2 towers. It wasn't in first block. If another man wins a skirmish, exert Wolf to take control of a site. And then cards like this that key off of that, spot a site you control, and exert Hill Chief to draw 3 cards. So you can go with a really, really direct, simple, I'm going to make my Dunlanders really, really buff route. And there are tons of good cards for that. You can also go more complex if you want to. And even though they look so simple on the surface, you can totally go for like, I'm going to do site control and get the bonuses from it and like build a really nasty engine out of spawning that kind of a thing. And then, I mean, these abilities on like these guys, becoming fierce, discarding possessions, it's just a reward for being who they are, for being strong and winning the skirmishes that they're meant to wound. So there's certainly plenty of like cross subgroup compatibility in here. I've also included Saruman on here. I love this. So his first sentence, Saruman may not be assigned to a skirmish. Every Saruman says that until like Shadows blocks. What's missing here? What's missing from this sentence? Most Saruman copies can't take wounds during the archery phase. Oh, so Dunlanders are so pathetic during the archery phase. You have to have Saruman out there without the ability to not take wounds during the archery phase, specifically so that he can go out there and soak up the wounds like a pincushion when the Dunlanders go out there. So he's a bit of armor for them. And then keying into that, if you have the spare vitality, you can make them strength +2. So going for the overwhelming all the time. Yeah, so there's Dunland. They are a lot of fun. Okay, and then Sauron. Pardon me for saying I don't know quite what's going on here. I can say that clearly, like looking at these guys, they came into their own during like Series 5 and 6. There aren't any Sauron cards in Series 4. Like a huge chunk of the Sauron orcs are draw a card. Okay, when you play this minion, exert him, remove 2, draw a card. When you play this minion, exert him, discard 2 cards from hand, draw a card. Spot 5 burdens, draw a card. Spot 6 companions, draw a card. Exert twice, spot another orc, draw 3 cards. Maybe we'll prevent that. Play condition, exert this minion, remove 2. Wow, that's a lot. Draw a card. Orc Insurgent, exert this minion, draw X cards and add X, where X is the number of free people's cultures you can spot over 2. So I can see like where that goes. The idea that under the right circumstances, the Sauron orcs like set up this huge draw engine from the top of your deck, and just keep adding and keep adding and keep adding. And so many of these guys are trackers. So even though their site is site 6, you finally have like a really powerful mechanic. Like on this guy, the site number of each Soren Orc is -3. So as soon as you get to site 3, if you have like the Orc Cutthroat or Grishnok or the Orc Patrol, you can very much like Uglik get rid of the entire roaming penalty, not by removing the roaming penalty itself, but just by making the Soren Orcs stop roaming, period. And that could have a little bit of a defensive purpose against like Ringbound Rangers too, although that's an uphill battle because you're at site 6. What I was talking about though is they have that draw engine. They want to play a lot from the top of their deck. That takes a lot of Twilight because, I mean, it takes them a while to stop roaming. And they're not inexpensive. They're not like Moria Orcs where you're adding. Like, again, look at this guy. You get to draw a card by removing 2 and exerting him. Remove 2 when you play a condition. Now, here's a counterexample. If you spot enough cultures, cool. That's great. So there's like a stacking effect, I think, that they're going for. I would suggest that in sort of my inexperience with this culture, probably the biggest problem is that all of these conditional methods of drawing a card, they're very varied and you can't necessarily set them up. This one is fine. Like you can play him. Sure, you can discard 2 cards from hand. If there are cards you can afford, you have a good deal of control over that. This guy, if there's Twilight, you can do it. That's expensive, but okay. But once you get to Gate Trooper, you have to spot 5 burdens. That's kind of on your opponent. Like, what's your opponent up to? Unless you're also building into the deck a lot of burden adding, which might require splashing Nazgul or like Ninja Golem or that kind of a thing. The Gate Soldier, you can play condition. That's fine. This guy, you have to spot 6 companions. That's kind of on your opponent. Are they going to have 6? We don't know. Orc Insurgent, are they running a kind of multicultural deck? Are you going to have more than 2 cultures out there? We're not sure. So broadly, I would say Soren Orcs are, once again, an uphill climb. And I don't know if their central mechanic in Tower's Block is very powerful. But, as always, if you find this thematically fun, you research it, you go for it, you may find something like really powerful. I don't know how to advise someone necessarily how to build a really like powerful deck with Sauron though. I will say this much. So there's a card called Forces of Mordor that got put on the X list. It says like spot X Sauron Orcs to add X. And certainly once you get into third block with Sauron culture, but even here, I can see it starting. There's an angle for adding a lot of Twilight, spotting a lot of Orcs, and like keeping the engine going that way. The problem is Forces of Mordor, I don't think it should be on the X list. There's my soapbox, but it is. It is on the X list, so like in tournament play, it's not an option. You can't do that. So again, I don't know. I don't know what Sauron Orcs are up to.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with metas is there's always going to be something that's in meta and out of meta, right? And it's okay for Sauron or Mordor to just be out of meta. So yeah, it's understandable. So not everything is always going to be in the meta. That's the point of a meta, right?
Yeah. No, I commented on the Fellowship Block video that Sauron Orcs at that time were kind of like the 4th of the 4 shadow cultures in the meta. And I wrote this down. I want people to know. But I went out a few weeks later to just a small group gathering, like 4 of us. Someone brought a Sauron Orc. We were playing first block, Wounding Machine, and it absolutely destroyed me. I even did a rematch with the guy, and I lost again. I couldn't handle it. So, like, just because there are answers to a certain shadow culture doesn't mean that, like, your opponent is going to bring the answer, right? The first block problem with Sauron Orcs is if you play Sleep Caradhras by Gandalf and knock all the shadow conditions off the board, suddenly the power's gone. But what if you're not accounting for that? Like me. What if I'm not doing condition removal and I've got 4 archery per turn and 3 exertions every time I'm moving, and I'm just getting absolutely destroyed? So, yeah, like, have fun. You know, if you want to build a Sorin Orc deck, you can win. Something's out there.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a really great overview, though, Ben. Thanks for taking us through all the different decks. I mean, obviously, you know, Isengard's sort of the top of the meta there, but once again, play with whatever's fun, right? You just want to build a Sauron deck, and that's great. So anyone have any questions, leave it in the comments. This has been a really fun time doing this. We'll see if we do a follow-up or something. Maybe we can even just do a deck deep dive. Maybe that might be a fun thing to do in the future.
Ooh, yeah.
Just kind of go through like one, or, you know, just trying to put out resources for folks that want to figure out how to play this game, you know, and figure it out. So hopefully these are useful. Let us know what you'd like to see next in the comments. But thanks for tuning in, everybody.
And thanks for having me.
Yeah.